He laughed while signing the papers. Not a nervous laugh. Not the awkward kind people use to hide fear. This was loud, careless, and sharp like a door slamming shut on purpose. The sound ricocheted off the marble walls of the Hillsborough County courtroom, too bright for a place where marriages came to die. The pen shook in his hand, not from doubt, but from amusement. Across the table, my soon-to-be ex-husband leaned back in his chair and flashed a grin at the gallery behind us, like he'd just nailed the final line of a stand-up routine. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. The bailiff stared straight ahead, trained not to react. The clerk kept typing, keys tapping softly, pretending this was just another file, another ending. Finally, he muttered as he dragged his signature across the page. Long, confident, proud, freedom. The paper made a faint scratching sound as he lifted the pen. That sound cut deeper than his laughter ever had. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my spine straight, my face still. I didn't give him what he wanted. Judge Raymond Cole adjusted his glasses, silver frames catching the overhead light. He was calm in the way men get after decades of watching people promise forever and then tear it apart with lawyers present. He flipped through the documents once more, slow and deliberate. Before we finalize the dissolution, he said evenly, the court must enter the updated financial disclosures into the record. The room quieted. Even the old ceiling fan above us seemed to slow, its dull hum stretching thin like it knew something was coming. The clerk cleared her throat. Judge Cole read on. Mrs. He paused, corrected himself smoothly. Miss Layla's accounts include one checking account, one savings account, and a trust. I felt my attorney, Marlene Brooks, shift beside me. Not surprise. Readiness. The judge's eyes moved across the page. Then he stopped. He looked up at me, then back down, then up again. Slower this time, like he wanted to make sure the words hadn't rearranged themselves. Counsel, he said, addressing both attorneys. Do you see this figure? Miss Brooks stood. Yes, Your Honor. My ex's lawyer leaned in, squinting hard, his mouth tightening. My ex, still smiling, swung his foot under the table, bored, impatient, already imagining the bar he'd hit after this. Judge Cole took a breath. The trust listed under Miss Pond, Layla's name, shows a current available balance of $150 million. The courtroom didn't explode. It inhaled. The smile slid off his face so fast it didn't even have time to break. His foot stopped mid-swing. His mouth opened, then closed, like his brain forgot to send instructions to breathe. Somewhere behind us, someone gasped. A phone vibrated and was hastily silenced. The clerk's pen clicked once. Too loud. I stared straight ahead. I didn't turn toward him, because if I did, I might have seen panic bloom where laughter used to live, and I wasn't ready to carry that too. Judge Cole looked at me again. Miss Layla, he said calmly. Can you confirm that the North Shore Mercy Trust belongs to you? My throat tightened. Images flashed: warm kitchens, fogged windows, hands that shook not from weakness but from age, and a folded letter with a small blue key drawn in the corner. Before I could speak, my ex leaned toward me, his voice suddenly soft, suddenly careful. Layla, he whispered. What is he talking about? The judge raised his gavel. We'll take 5 minutes to verify the attached letter of intent and the sealed instruction, he said. No one leaves this courtroom. The gavel came down once, and that was the moment everything I thought was small about my life cracked wide open, because the money wasn't the truth. The letter was. Oh, before I go on, I should tell you something. My name is Layla. Just Layla. And this story didn't begin in a courtroom. People think money stories start at banks or boardrooms. Mine started in a church kitchen that never quite cooled down, long before a judge said my name out loud, before anyone whispered numbers that made grown men forget how to breathe. I spent my Saturdays in the basement of St. Luke's Community Church on the south side of Clearwater. The windows were always fogged from boiling pots. The air smelled like onions, garlic, and cheap coffee that had been reheated too many times. It was loud in a soft way, metal ladles clanking, plastic chairs scraping, voices overlapping without urgency. That's where I learned how to stand for hours without complaining. That's where I learned that hunger makes people quiet, not dramatic. And that's where my husband first said he loved my heart. Back then, we were new in the way that feels like magic. The kind of new where every shared look feels like a promise, and every plan sounds possible just because you're saying it together. He used to carry boxes from the delivery truck, sleeves rolled up, acting like muscle was currency. I chopped vegetables, careful to make the pieces even, like order itself was a form of respect. We smiled at each other over paper plates. We laughed easily. He said I made people feel seen. I thought that meant something. "I like that you care," he told me once, leaning against the counter, watching me hand a bowl of soup to an older man who wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Someone has to," I said. At the time, I thought we were building the same future. I worked days at an after-school program, nights when I could afford classes at the community college. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast, but it was honest. I believed in small steps. I believed in doing the next right thing and trusting the rest to catch up. He believed in speed. The second year of our marriage, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It crept in through comments and jokes that landed just a little wrong. He started counting. He counted bills. He counted hours. He counted what I brought in versus what he did. "You spend too much time there," he said one night, nodding toward a flyer from the church pantry sitting on our kitchen table. "That stuff doesn't pay rent. It feeds people," I said. "Feeding people isn't a career," he replied, like it was a fact, not an opinion. I laughed it off then. I wish I hadn't, because that laugh planted something. By the third year, his voice had changed when he talked about money. It got sharper. Taller. He started using words like return, value, leverage. He opened a separate account for business reasons. He came home later. He bought things he called investments and looked at my worn shoes like they were a personal failure. "Kindness is cute," he told me once. Not unkindly. Until the lights get shut off. I didn't know how to explain that kindness wasn't a phase for me. It wasn't a hobby. It was a way of standing in the world. So instead, I just kept showing up. To the kids, to the kitchen, to people who needed a chair before they needed a lecture. That's when she walked in. It was a Wednesday, slow and gray. The kind of day where the weather forgets to decide. She stood near the door like she didn't want to be noticed. Not old and years old in stories. A faded scarf wrapped around her neck, folded and refolded so many times it looked like a river that had learned patience. "I'm just looking," she said when I smiled at her. "So is everyone," I answered, without thinking. She laughed at that. A small sound, a careful one. I made her a bowl of stew. Soft carrots, rice that didn't clump, bread with real butter. She ate slowly, like her body had to remember it was allowed to accept something warm. When she stood to leave, her hand shook, her glass tipped. Water spilled across the table and started running toward the floor. "Don't worry," I said, already reaching for a towel. "My hands are used to catching things." She paused, watching me, studying me like I was a sentence she might need later. "What are you practicing for?" she asked. "For when something important falls," I said, half joking. She didn't smile that time. She introduced herself simply, a single initial, nothing else. We talked while the pot simmered. She told me about a daughter who didn't call, a kitchen she used to sing in, a garden she missed. I told her about the kids who loved glue sticks more than rules, and how my mother used to say, "If you have enough for 2 spoons of sugar, you have enough to share one." When she left, she pressed a folded paper into my hand. "If you ever need anything," she said. There was a phone number, and a small drawing of a key in blue ink. "I won't ask," I told her quickly. "But thank you." She looked at me for a long moment. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the door knocks on you." Then she was gone. I tucked the paper away and went back to stirring soup. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first time my life quietly changed direction. After that Wednesday, she started coming every week, always at the slow hour, that quiet stretch between the after-school rush and dinner, when the room felt like it was holding its breath. I kept a stool for her by the window without thinking about it. She never asked for it. She just smiled when she saw it, like we were keeping a secret together. She asked questions that didn't sound like questions at first. What would you do if you had more time? What would you build if no one laughed at you? What would you keep if everything else fell away? I answered honestly. I always did. I told her I wanted to build something small but steady, a place where kindness wasn't an afterthought, a place where people didn't have to explain their pain before being offered help. "You already are," she said once. "You just don't see it because you're standing inside it." At home, my marriage was shrinking, not collapsing. Shrinking. That's worse. Collapse is loud. Shrinking happens quietly, while you're still pretending you're fine. My husband stopped asking about my day. He stopped pretending to listen. He started laughing at the wrong moments when I suggested budgeting, when I mentioned counseling, when I said we should talk like we were on the same side. One night, tired and careless, he said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a charity." That word stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it explained everything. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just felt something settle into place, like a picture frame finally straightened. A few weeks later, she handed me an envelope. "For you," she said, tapping it twice, like a habit she'd practiced. Inside was a handwritten note and a card from a private bank I'd never heard of. The note said, "Mercy is not a favor. It is a map. Use it well." Her initial at the bottom. I tried to give it back. "I can't," I said. "We're fine." She looked at me the way people do when they know you're lying to yourself, not them. "What is fine?" she asked gently. A word people use when they're drowning quietly. She closed my fingers around the card. "It's not a gift," she said. "It's a key to a room you already own." I didn't use it. Not then. I tucked the card into the back of my drawer, beneath old t-shirts and the book I was too tired to finish at night. I kept going to the kitchen, kept riding the bus to work, kept trying to stitch my marriage together with thread that snapped the moment it was pulled. Then the laughter got louder. When I finally walked into the bank, it wasn't dramatic. No music. No thunder. Just a lobby that echoed your footsteps back at you and made you decide whether you liked the sound of yourself. "My name is Layla," I said at the desk. I was told to ask for a beginning. The woman blinked. Then her expression changed. And that was when I learned what it feels like for a door to open without being pushed. The trust was real. The number was real. But more than that, the responsibility was real. It wasn't money meant to sit. It was money meant to move, to build, to protect. I took classes. I asked stupid questions. I learned words no one had ever expected me to need, and I kept it quiet. Not to hide, to protect. When my husband suggested divorce, he said it lightly, like it was overdue housekeeping. "You'll land on your feet," he told me. "You always do." I almost told him the truth. Almost. But some things need time to learn how to stand before they're asked to walk. So we went to court, and he laughed. By the time the judge called us back to order, the courtroom felt smaller, not because the walls had moved, but because the air had thickened. 5 minutes passed the way storms do, quiet on the surface, violent underneath. No one spoke. No one shifted. Even my ex stopped pretending to be relaxed. He kept glancing at me now, not with laughter, with calculation. Judge Raymond Cole returned to the bench, a thin folder in his hands. The seal was intact, heavy cream paper, the kind that doesn't exist unless someone planned for a moment to last longer than a lifetime. "We have verified the attached documentation," he said calmly. "The letter of intent is authentic, the trust is valid, and the sealed instruction is enforceable under state law." My ex's attorney leaned forward, tense. "Your Honor," the judge raised a hand. "You'll have time." He turned to me. "Ms. Layla," he said. "The court requires your consent to enter the sealed instruction into the record." My ex reached for my sleeve. "Layla," he whispered urgently, voice shaking now. "Whatever this is, we can fix this. We don't need to do this." I looked at him for the first time that day. Really looked. The confidence was gone. The laughter had evaporated. What sat in its place wasn't remorse. It was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being seen clearly for the first time. I thought of the church kitchen. The steam. The hands that shook but still served food. I thought of a folded note and a blue ink key. I thought of a woman who never raised her voice but never wasted a word. "Yes," I said. The word didn't shake. Judge Cole nodded and broke the seal. The sound was soft. Paper against paper, but it carried. He read slowly, deliberately, like someone who knew every sentence mattered. "If this instruction is opened in court," he began, "it means 2 things have occurred. First, Layla has told the truth with her life. Second, the man who laughed at that truth must hear what follows." A ripple moved through the room. My ex's breath went shallow. The judge continued. "The Mercy Trust exists not to reward wealth, but to protect values. It is shielded from marital claims, external influence, and coercion. Any attempt to control or intimidate its beneficiary will result in immediate forfeiture of all associated privileges." My ex's lawyer stiffened. The judge didn't look up. "Furthermore," he read, "this trust was structured with foresight. Should Layla ever be diminished, mocked, or treated as lesser for choosing compassion over profit, the trust is authorized to act independently, expanding its protections and disclosures as necessary." The room leaned forward. The judge turned the page. "As of the last quarter, he read, and paused. He blinked once, then looked up. "The court notes," he said carefully, "that the Mercy Trust is not static." My ex gripped the edge of the table. "It is," the judge continued, "actively invested in long-term philanthropic and community development initiatives. As of the most recent valuation, total controlled assets exceed—" My ex collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a shout. His knees buckled. The chair scraped. He hit the floor hard, the sound echoing off the walls like punctuation at the end of a sentence he'd never expected to read. Gasps filled the room. The bailiff rushed forward. Someone called for medical assistance. The judge stood, gavel raised but not struck. I didn't move. I didn't rush to him. Not because I hated him, but because I finally understood that mercy does not mean erasing consequences. Paramedics arrived quickly. Efficient. Professional. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, his eyes fluttered open for a moment. He looked at me like he wanted to speak. I held his gaze, and for the first time, he looked away. Judge Cole adjourned the session until the following morning, but the truth had already done its work. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The silence felt different now, not empty. Earned. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I made tea. I sat at the table where we used to argue about money and listened to the kettle cool. Kindness had not saved my marriage, but it had saved me. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. My ex returned, pale and quiet. He didn't look at me. Judge Cole finished reading the valuation into the record. The number landed like a door closing behind me. When it was over, my ex stood. "I don't want anything," he said hoarsely. I waved my claim. No laughter followed, just silence. The judge finalized the divorce. When the gavel came down, it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like space. Later, as I stepped outside into the sun, reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. I walked past them, past the courthouse steps, past the life I'd been shrinking myself to fit inside. I thought of the note again. Mercy is not a favor. It is a map. I finally understood where it was leading. People expect fireworks at the end of stories like this. A villain dragged away. A crowd cheering. Someone finally shouting the truth loud enough to shake the walls. That's not how it ended. It ended quietly. A week after the divorce was finalized, I went back to St. Luke's Community Church. Same basement, same long folding tables, same dent in the wall where a chair had hit it years ago and never quite been fixed. The kitchen smelled like onions again, like it always had. No one clapped when I walked in. No one whispered numbers. No one asked me for anything. They just handed me an apron. I tied it around my waist and started chopping carrots. That's when I knew I hadn't lost myself along the way. The trust moved forward the way it was meant to. Slowly, carefully, with guardrails. We funded after-school programs, food security initiatives, small housing projects that didn't make headlines but kept people warm. I hired people smarter than me and listened to them. I said, "Explain it again," without shame. And no one laughed. Not once. As for my ex, we never spoke again. I heard things, of course, that he told people he'd been blindsided, that he said he never knew, that he framed the story like something had been taken from him. But nothing was taken. Something was revealed. There's a difference. Sometimes I think about that moment in the courtroom the exact second his laughter disappeared. Not with satisfaction, with clarity, because it wasn't about money. It was about truth finally walking into a room where it had been mocked for too long. Kindness didn't protect me from pain. It didn't save my marriage. It didn't make life easier. What it did was give me a spine. It taught me how to stand still when someone tried to make me small. It taught me that mercy without boundaries is just permission for harm, and that compassion paired with courage can move mountains quietly. I used to think strength had to announce itself. Now I know better. Strength shows up early, stays late, and doesn't laugh at other people's lives. If you've ever been laughed at for choosing kindness, if someone ever told you that caring made you weak, if you've ever been made to feel small because your values didn't come with a price tag, this is what I want you to take with you. You don't need to harden to survive. You don't need to mock others to be powerful. And you don't need to explain your worth to people who only understand numbers. Mercy is not a favor. It's a map. And if you follow it long enough quietly, stubbornly, with courage, you might just find yourself standing somewhere you were told you'd never belong. Where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Kindness isn't weakness. It's delayed power.